Hey guys, in this video we'll cover a quick history of Jenkins CI/CD, go through installation of Jenkins and give you a quick overview of Jenkins Navigation. Then we'll go through a demo of creating and running jobs in Jenkins, and finally we'll cover some of the best practices used in Jenkins. Let's get to it. Jenkins is one of the most popular open source CI and CD tools. By definition, if we go to Jenkins.io, they kind of define it as the leading open source automation server. Now, if you look at wiki explanation, it's a bit better. It still says free open source automation server. It helps to automate parts of software development, building, testing, deploying, facilitating continuous integration and deployment. In short, it's one of the most popular CI/CD tools in software development. Jenkins was one of the original open source CI/CD tools. I think it's one of the first ones developed in early 2000s by a project in Sun Microsystems. As early as 2005 it was released. It's built on Java, which was good at the time, and it's still good. It's just slower, and installation can be a pain at times. But overall, it's a well-built and well-tested product and used by many thousands of large and small organizations. So it's really important, I think, to know it and understand how it works, as it's one of the initial CI/CD tools, and a lot of organizations still use Jenkins. Installation of Jenkins can be a pain sometimes because it is built on Java. I see there's a lot of dependencies. However, depending on where you're trying to install their installation tools, in let's say Linux environment, there's packages. The other nice thing is Jenkins has a supported Docker version, so you can run it in Docker. So for this example, we are gonna run Jenkins in Docker. However, we're gonna use ZoomAdmin to install it. So those of you who don't know what ZoomAdmin is a sort of a control panel, cloud-based control panel that helps you run multiple different applications on your servers. And it does use Docker, so each application runs in a Docker container. So you connect your server to ZoomAdmin, and then you are able to deploy and run multiple applications and check their statuses and so on and so forth. So we're gonna create a new Jenkins instance using ZoomAdmin. So you go create, you go browse more, Jenkins, select it, click OK, name it Jenkins 2, go next, and then you just select a server that you've connected with ZoomAdmin, and there's advanced Docker settings, but you can just leave the defaults, and you can also put a domain if you want to map a domain to this instance of Jenkins, and click on publish. Now I'm not gonna do that. I've already created an instance here, and as we can tell, I've mapped a domain here, and these are the settings. If I click here, it'll navigate to this brand new Jenkins instance. Now when you first come to this page, it's the initial installation. Jenkins does create a one-time password for you to use, and it's located inside Jenkins home directory. So you do have to SSH into your server and navigate to this path to get the password. Now in our case, because we're running in Docker container, we actually the nice thing with using ZoomAdmin is that it maps a folder inside the container automatically for you. It's called volumes in Docker, if you're familiar. So we just have to navigate to that folder to get that. So now we can use any SSH client. I am using Visual Studio Code, VS Code remote extension. There's a video for that. I'll link in the below if you want to do that as well. But I've configured my remote to my demo server here, so I'm gonna go ahead and connect to that server. And the nice thing with VS Code, I can just navigate to any folder and be able to edit files directly in VS Code. So I'm gonna open the folder, and again I'm using ZoomAdmin. ZoomAdmin, all the apps are located /ZoomAdmin apps. If you click on open this folder here, yes, this is the folder I'm gonna open, and you'll see all of your apps here. So Jenkins 1 is our application, and data is automatically mapped to Jenkins home directory. And if we go back to Jenkins here, so secrets, initial admin password, that's what we want to pull. So secrets, initial admin password is the password you want to use. Copy paste in here, click on continue, keep the default installation, it's fine. Click on it, it's gonna install some of the default plugins it needs to. Some of it you probably don't need to. You can uncheck some of them if you're not gonna use it, but for this demo I'm gonna keep all the default ones, and I'll come back when this is done. Okay, and finally it's gonna ask you to enter username and password. And finally, if you want to map a URL to it, so I'm gonna say yes, save and finish, and I can start using Jenkins. When you first log in into Jenkins, this is what you will see. You don't have any jobs yet. The menu on the left will kind of self-explanatory, but does tell you if you want to create a new item. Is kind of creating a new job. People manage Jenkins. If you go into manage Jenkins, that's where you also have your configuration plugins. You can also navigate to that from this menu here, manage, and you can navigate to different sections of the configuration and system and users plugins, which is something you will probably use a lot. Credentials is also something else you probably will want to use a lot, depending on what credentials you're saving. So if we create a new item here, let's say job 1, and I want to say freestyle, and click OK. So this is what it looks like by default. There's certain tabs or sections that you want to look at. Source control management is where you provide your source control details, like Git, you'll specify URL and things like that. Build triggers is what triggers a build of this repository, of this project, right? And there's multiple ways to go about this. Trigger based, which, you know, when you make a commit, let's say to your Git repository, we can ping Jenkins and it will automatically start building. You can do it based on schedule or based on polling. I'm not gonna spend too much time on this right now, but I will have a follow-up video on actually demoing Jenkins pipelines, which we'll use an actual example and start building a test project. Build environment, this is where you'll specify some of the details of the build environment. And of course there's a build steps and post build steps. This build step is basically the first, you know, the command you run to actually start building, and this could be a shell command, this could be any, you know, and you can also add plugins. It will create more options in this menu here, depending on what you're trying to build. And post build, just like the name applies, what you want to do after the build is done. You can send an email notification, you can publish it to the actual environment that you want to deploy to. There's all kinds of things. Again, there's plugins that can add to this menu as well. So that's kind of it. If you save this project here, now if you go back to home here, click on Jenkins, you will see your job here, and you can create tabs here based on job name, so it'll be easier to navigate through certain jobs. Let's say dev, production, different environments. That's kind of the standard in terms of navigating to different jobs. But if you only have a handful of jobs, it's easy to just leave it in all section. but most organizations might have tens or hundreds of jobs, in which case you do want to create the tabs to make it easier. You can also create views per person to kind of make it for you personalized, your view as to what you want to see. You can do that as well. As profile stuff here, the rest is kind of usual. The most critical parts again is the job section, and when you navigate to the job, you will have this build now option. You can delete, configure, go back to configuration of the job. You can do that, or delete. So this is kind of higher level navigation of Jenkins. Let's create another job here. Let's this time actually give it a meaningful name. Again, keep in mind the actual projects, you want to name the jobs based on a project you're trying to build, let's say, and then as a standard you always want to apply environment name as well. Let's say dev, my cool app, if that's the app name, so you know that this is the dev for the environment built for the application. Let's click on continue. You can also copy from another job if that's what you wanted as well. That's gonna actually, you'll be using that a lot, because after you configure the first job, you probably want to copy that for other jobs and just change minor details like environment name, things like that. And this job, let's say we want to create a step for the build and just want to execute a shell command. Let's just say I want to echo something. Let's say hello world, right? Let's say that's a build command, and that's all we want to do, and save and apply. Now if we go back to Jenkins, we have two jobs now. You can go back into your job here and let's run it, and because it's pretty quick, it should be pretty quick to get it done. See, it's already done, and you'll be spending a lot of time inside the builds as there is a build number here, the build number 1. And you do want to look at the console output. This will tell you exactly what happened, what ran, what failed, kind of the log of the actual build details. It'll show you that, hey, this is the command we ran and this is the output, and finished successfully, right? That's all we had to do. So that's how you configure the jobs, and again, depending on what you're building, if it fails, this will turn red as well. So it'll quickly tell you what the job number, how long it took to run it, and so on and so forth. You can also run the build from here. Let's say you want to schedule that again. It's called scheduling in Jenkins, but basically it's instant when you do it manually. And like I said, you can also trigger the builds based on something else, like an outside trigger, like from your GitHub repository or somewhere else to trigger a build inside Jenkins. There's a way to do that as well, and I will try to show that in our next video for Jenkins pipelines. And again, this is the second build that successfully finished, and now you'll see the build number. That's how the jobs are configured inside Jenkins. In this video, I'll cover a few of the best practices in Jenkins, but most likely I will have a separate video to go into more detail on that. Now I'll mention a few best practices in this video. Number 1, you want to use parameterized builds. What does that mean? So if I go into this project that we just created, click on configure, there's this option here, project parameter is parameterized. What it means is that you are able to create parameters to your build project. What do I mean? Let's create an example. Let's say I want to create a string parameter, and let's say I want to pass my environment name, and then let's say this is dev. Okay, I could say trim and hit save. Now what this is gonna do, this is gonna create this, it's gonna rename actually the build option here. It says build with parameters. So if I click on this, it's not gonna start automatically. You'll say you have this parameter configured. Do you want to keep the default, or do you want to change it to something else before you run the build? So this allows you to create multiple parameters based on whatever options you want to pass to your build script. when you're building the project. Let's say I want to pass, this is the environment, this is the parameter I created. I can build it, but let's see how we can use this, right? So if we go back to configure, actually let's rename these to uppercase op environment. So that's actually another best practice, to use upper names when it comes to parameters. Just like environment variables, we usually use uppercase. And then to use this parameter inside your build script, it's just like the built-in commands. You can just do $sign and curly brackets and give your parameter name, and this will basically use the value that you've entered. Let's see if this will work. It's actually, I did have to change this to double quotes for shell script to work. So if I save this now again and run this, so this is one we ran. If you go to console output, it'll show you this is the environment parameter that you've entered. So it's a good way to kind of pass on environment parameters to your script. It becomes really helpful when you have multiple projects, maybe even sub-projects, to pass on the parameters to sub-projects as well. So that's number one. Number two is having a build script. So in this example, we actually defined our build script inside freeform, right? Just like here. Now the best practice is really not to do this, but instead put the script inside your repository, and then you can actually run a file point to that repository, basically moving all of your build script inside a script file, and then saving it inside the repository, and here you just basically execute that script. This will basically help you to better control your script. First of all, it'll go to code review process if there's a change to the build script, but secondly, when something happens to Jenkins, you always have that script saved inside your repository and has version control and all that. And versus someone just coming here and changing something with, it's hard to go back to that version you had before, right? So that's not a best practice. The third is really to start using pipelines. And again, I will have a separate video to cover pipelines, but basically, like when you create a new item, there's a pipeline project as well. What this allows you to do is, instead of having all these different steps inside Jenkins, like we know we have the build, source control, build, environment, all that, all those steps or stages become a script, just like our build script. It gets saved in a repository, which then when you point to it, it automatically knows what you've configured. So basically moving all of the configuration of Jenkins project to a script file, and again has all the features of having a version control and having a better control, and not necessarily having to come to Jenkins to change something. You can do it inside the script, and everyone can review your change before it gets pushed. And for that, I will have a pipeline video to kind of go into more details. Another good practice is actually to use some of the plugins it installed for you. One of them I think was, let's see if I can find it, to discard old builds. So it's this option here. When you check that, you can specify how many builds you want to keep and discard the rest of them. Now I think I have found that there's other plugins you can use, not just this built-in option, if it doesn't work for you all the time. But it should work, I think, just for the basic building options. So of course you want to also use email notifications. That's another best practice to always send out emails when something fails, when something builds successfully, depending on how many emails you want to get, but definitely you want to know when something fails. And finally, backup and restore. We'll have another video to cover that. It's really important to back up all of your Jenkins configurations, especially when you're not using pipelines and things like that. And if something happens to your Jenkins instance, you can lose all of this configuration, and it'll be a pain to come back and redo everything. So there are backup and restore plugins, but I found that a lot of them don't work well, especially when you have a large system, when you have a lot of different projects, a lot of different builds. A lot of those backup restore plugins don't work well when you have a large number of projects, and just in my case I found that they didn't work well. Instead, I will have a video for it, but if we go back to our VS Code here, the data section, basically what you want to do is basically back up the entire data directory here. That's all of your configuration, including the plugins and stuff you have. And what's nice, if you have a cloud server like DigitalOcean, AWS, somewhere else, as long as your server is being backed up, it also, even if you're running Jenkins in container, if you're using ZoomAdmin, it will automatically map a volume to this data folder inside container Jenkins home folder, which means when your server gets backed up, it will actually back up this folder as well, and then you can always go back to it. But if you want to particularly have a backup of this folder also in a separate location, you can also just create a script to back up the folder, and it'll be much easier to restore that afterwards, or even moving it to another server, in which case something I've done before. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. School of Software is a brand new channel, so I really appreciate all the likes and comments that I get, which just give me the motivation to keep creating more videos for you guys. Thanks again, and see you next time.